Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, baby, live around the world on the interwebs at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome to the program. Tuesday edition of the Big Radio Show. And, ooh, baby, we're ready to go. Today's Tuesday, which means it's the deep dive into the weekly top three. Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets is waiting in the wings. Chris Story is actually not going to be with us today, but we're going to be joined in hour two by Harmony Tomaszewski, who is talking about her run for the GVEA electric board in Fairbanks. We're going to talk about that. Those things do matter, believe it or not. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we do that, and I don't want to leave Brad hanging too long, but I want to remind you, of course, that the Alaska Radio Auction is still up and running. And we still have tons of great items, including basic pistol courses, concealed carry courses from Point Blank Firearms. I know there's still restaurant certificates. I know there's still restaurants for stays at the Ocean Shores Hotel in Homer. There's all kinds of stuff in there. And of course, the big ticket items are still up for bid, and that bidding is going to go till this Friday. And so you can check it all out at AlaskaRadioAuction.com. Go do it right now. Fly, be free. There's all kinds of stuff for you to go check it out. Go do it. Go do it. Also, of course, on Friday, I will be off this Friday for a 4-day holiday weekend. I'll be off on Friday and, of course, on Monday for Memorial Day, as is my custom. So we'll be doing Firearms Thursday, and that's it. That's the housekeeping. All right. Man, we got to it. And so off with you. Do your thing. Let's go over here and talk with Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, who says, fly, be free. Go to AlaskaRadioAuction.com. Not to be seen as an endorsement by Brad Keithley, but there you go. Hello, my friend. How are you? How are you doing this morning?
Michael, I'm doing great this morning. You just made me realize we're almost all the way to Memorial Day. I hadn't factored that in yet.
It's what happens when you're retired, man. You don't even know what day of the week it is. You're lucky you do this one day a week. You're like, oh, I got to show up for that one day a week. Is that what it's like to be retired, Brad? I just want to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
No, my week's pretty full between getting ready for this and the column that I write on Fridays. It takes up most of the week.
The time does fly, though. My wife looked at me and said, man, do you realize it's already almost Memorial Day and the sun doesn't go down till 11 p.m.? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's getting good. All right, Brad. Well, this is the recap, my friend. We're here. We saw the madness that took place on the final day of session, where they apparently just couldn't even follow the rules then. And so let's get down to it. Today's topics include the good with the session, the bad with the session, and the 9 days of we're 9 days before the election signups and the deadline for filing. And what do you see about the election? So let's get started with number one, the good of the election. And you were very clear to state usually that meant they didn't do something. That was the good at this point. So give it to me, my friend.
Yeah, the good of the session. I spent a lot of time trying to come up with one good that was something they actually did. But at the end of the day, I couldn't come up with anything that was something they actually did. It sort of reflects my entire reaction to the session, that all of my goods of what they did were things that they failed to do, things that somebody had proposed. But in the end, the legislature failed to do it. The first one, in no particular order, The first one is that they did not pass the Cook Inlet royalty relief, the subsidies that you and I have talked about a lot on the show over the last few months. That was the proposal by some to grant royalty relief, in essence, give the state's gas away, and turns out they were going to throw in some oil too. Reduce the royalty to trivial levels on the state's gas in a way to try to encourage producers, their terms, try to incentivize producers to produce more. As we pointed out on the show, that wasn't necessary. The utilities, if it really was royalty relief that the producers need, the utilities can just add a clause to their contracts that said, we'll reimburse you for royalties you pay to the state. In other words, include it as part of the price term instead of the legislature giving away Alaska's resources in that way. The utilities evidently didn't want to do that, or tried, and the producers said, we got a better way. We'll get the money out of the state instead of you. But for whatever reason, some continued to press forward with the royalty relief. And I think a good thing out of the legislature is that the Senate stopped it. It passed the House, who wanted to give the money away. The Senate stopped it and said, look, we don't see the case for this. We don't see the economics why this is necessary. And so the Senate backed off of it.
And they actually requested an more in-depth analysis of what the cost was going to be. That was part of the problem, right? There wasn't like a true cost measure of what was going on. I mean, give credit where credit's due. Bert Stedman said we need a deeper analysis of this before we start giving it away.
Yeah, it's they wanted a deeper analysis of whether it would actually motivate the producers, and the answer at the end was they didn't think it would. I mean, the analyst said they didn't think it would. And again, part of this is, keep in mind, the utilities had the tool to do this all along. The utilities could add a royalty clause into the contracts that said, we'll reimburse you for royalty, and take it in as part of the price. The utilities have had that tool in their pocket all along. And, why the state has to step in a situation like that and give up money when the utilities have that tool in their pockets just never made any sense to me. I mean, in a prior life, I spent a lot of time in Louisiana, where there's a lot of royalty gas. State has royalty gas, and there's been those sorts of issues from time to time also about, well, producers don't have enough incentives. Well, the free market works. What happens down there is that the utilities, or the pipeline purchasers, or the fertilizer companies, which are big purchasers in Louisiana, all entered into excess royalty clauses and bought it. Never even thought of going to the state and asking for a bailout. They just took it upon themselves. So it's a good thing that the legislature didn't pass that. Now, hopefully, we will see the utilities move forward on market-based solutions as opposed to continue to hold out for subsidies from the legislature.
Well, we dodged a real bullet too there at the end, because at the very end they added in that reserves-based lending, where we would borrow money against we'd borrow money against our own reserves. I'm trying to figure out what genius dreamed that up. We lease reserves and you're going to use it as a collateral.
Michael, that passed.
Oh, did it pass both? Oh, I thought it was connected to the royalty. So it was
in a different bill. It was in the electric transmission bill, and it passed. And it's on my list of bad things.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to get ahead of you there. Go ahead.
No. You could easily confuse the two, but it did pass. The second thing that didn't pass is we didn't pass defined benefits. We didn't pass a permanent K through 12 increase, and those are both good things. Without a fiscal plan, we know who pays for that additional spending, and we had enough additional spending in this legislature alone, which is going to be something I'll talk about in the bad things. But that pile on of additional defined benefits and the permanent K through 12 increase would have just added more spending. It may be fine to do those things, or it may not be fine, but it's not fine to do them without a fiscal plan, because we know that they end up getting financed on the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families through additional PFD cuts. And the failure of the legislature to address those, I take as a win. I mean, there was a lot of pressure to pass defined benefits. Kathy Giesel was a champion of it, former conservative, now, who knows? Kathy Giesel was a champion of that, tried to stuff it in a bill, indeed, right at the end of the legislature to get it, to put it in a bill that they viewed as a House must pass, and so tried to stuff it that way. There were efforts at the end to get the permanent BSA increase right at the end of the House session. There were efforts by the minority to push the permanent BSA increase. Both of those got killed, and both of those are good things because they were pushed in the absence of a fiscal plan. People in this state have gotten way out in front of their skis in terms of spending before they have a plan for how to pay for the spending, and thinking they'll just shove it off on middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts and stopping additional spending. We didn't stop enough this session,
right?
But stopping additional spending until we get a fiscal plan in place, I think, is a win.
Well, and we never even got not even having a fiscal plan, but we didn't get a completed fiscal note, did we? I think they'd been waiting on that fiscal note on the defined benefits plan, and I don't think the expanded note ever really actually came out. There was a lot of discussion, but no actual numbers, was there?
Well, Giesel came out with what she said was the final fiscal note out of the state's normal actuaries on defined benefits, but it was one of those, the actuaries are really, getting the thumb screws put to them when they started out by saying, well, if you don't have, not that we believe this, by the way, but if you don't have, people staying longer as a result of defined benefits, or if you don't have more employees as a result of defined benefits, more permanent employees as a result of defined benefits, or if you have normal attrition, I mean, it was calculated in that way. There were a lot of contingencies that if they came true, then the cost wouldn't be very high. That's how the actuaries finally dealt with it. But let's recall that their first reaction, and these are actuaries who deal in numbers, who deal in probabilities, who deal in projections. Recall their first reaction was, you increase defined benefits, or you restore defined benefits, you're going to have more people staying around. And if you have more people staying around longer, you're going to have higher pension costs once they retire. And if you have defined benefits, you're probably going to have more people joining the state workforce. And if you have more people joining the state force, they did that calculation at the very beginning, and that was the fiscal note that Giesel and others didn't like, that added a lot of money. So what she finally got at the end, after applying the thumb screws, was, well, if those aren't true, if all those assumptions we in our actuarial profession made at the beginning, if they aren't true, well, yeah, it doesn't cost as much. That's the sort of fiscal note we got at the end. So it wasn't very convincing, and I think
makes it very good that we dodged that bullet. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to sidetrack you there.
No. It was a good side story about what she was trying to sell at the end, and it was great that people continued to resist that. The final thing I have on my list of good, because it's not a very long list, the final thing I have on my list of good is we didn't pass POMB 2570. Recall that at the end of last session, the Senate had passed a change to the PFD statute to change it to POMB 75 with some contingencies that if revenues came in above levels, then we might change it, sort of unachievable contingencies, and had passed POMB 2575. That came over to the House. It was referred first to House Ways and Means, and to Ben Carpenter's credit, they acted on it quickly. They amended it to POMB 5050. They took out the contingencies, the riders, and forwarded it on to House Finance. House Finance never did anything with it. It got in the course of the debate over the constitutional amendment on the PFD, it got pulled up, brought out of House Finance, ended up sitting at the end of the session in House Rules. But the good thing of all that is the legislature didn't pass POMB 2575 as some hoped it would.
It reminds me of Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain's comment about the only time we're in danger is when the legislature's in session. So the good stuff is the stuff that they didn't do, unfortunately, which brings us over to number 2, which we're going to get to in just a moment, the bad. that got passed. And there is probably more than we have time for, unfortunately. But we'll continue here in just a moment. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and the weekly top 3. The Michael Duke Show continues right after this. Don't go anywhere.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
All right, Brad Keithley continues with us right now. Sorry, I just had to laugh. It's not funny. Well, it is funny. Brian just said, Facebook just hit me with a 2-day ban for a 10-year-old post. Yeah, sorry, Brian. Brian is in the doghouse, folks. If you're looking for him, he's over on YouTube every morning for the next 2 days. I'm sorry, Brad. Go ahead.
Well, at least he knows what he got hit for. I mean, most times what I've seen, people get banned from or get into Facebook jail, and they don't know what it's for. I mean, they try to find out what it's for. They can't find out what it's for.
I'm still laughing about the whole video that I shared one time about these 3 teenage girls driving around in their car, and they scream and they pull over, they get out because there was a big spider on the dashboard. And the comment was, it was something like, I made a comment like, ooh, now we have to burn the car kind of thing. And that got me like a 3-day ban because I was suggesting violence because I mean, context is everything, right? But, now we have to burn the car because of the spider. And it was, I mean, there's no common sense in any of that stuff. But I'm with you, Brad. This session, it's kind of amazing that really all the good was the fact that they didn't actually do. And I think that's the thing. People want to go down to Juneau and do something, when a lot of times the best course of action is to either hold the line or actually repeal laws that we have on the books. I would be proud to say I didn't pass a single piece of I think the whole time I was in the borough assembly, I think I actually only passed 1 or 2 things over 5 years. And they had to do with protecting private property rights and empowering the people in the road service areas. That was pretty much the only bills that I sponsored the entire time I was there. I felt like I was running a rear guard defensive action the entire time.
Well, I mean, a great example of that is this whole Cook Inlet stuff, right? I mean, yes, we have an energy crisis. Now we have to do something to deal with the energy crisis. Well, other states have energy crises, and they let the market resolve it. They let the market step in and deal with the situation through the price function or through the terms function. Well, we'll get into this deeper in a minute in the bad, but this whole reserves guarantee deal that we've now passed for the Cook Inlet gas, that we're going to guarantee, provide lending and provide lending on the basis of reserves in the free market, in the real world. I mean, either the utilities provide those loans because they want the gas, they have an obligation to serve, and so they provide the loans because they need the gas in order to meet their obligation to serve, or they enter into take or pay contracts that commit them to purchase a certain amount that the purchaser is then able, or that the producer is then able to go out and use as security for a loan in the private market. In Alaska, we just run off. Somebody says the word crisis, and the next word out of somebody's mouth is legislature. Crisis, legislature.
Right.
I mean, it's just
right.
It's like the free market doesn't exist, and even Republicans get into this, right?
Well, and in nowhere did we see a discussion of, well, let's talk about the importation of gas. I mean, it's like it's not even just an afterthought. It is literally a last ditch hue and cry. And the problem is, because we're not pre-planning it now, when it does come down to that, because I guarantee you it'll come down to that, then we'll be in full-on crisis mode, and we won't get the best price possible. We won't get the best terms. We won't get anything, because then it will truly be a crisis. It'll be last minute, and they'll know it, and they'll have us over a barrelhead. I mean, because we're not planning this stuff out.
Well, I mean, it's the utilities' obligation to plan it out. They have a certificate obligation to serve, and they get all sorts of benefits in terms of a guaranteed rate of return and guaranteed cost recovery in exchange for the certificated obligation to serve. And so the utilities have this obligation to go get supply. That's how the market operates. And and hopefully now that the legislature didn't pass royalty relief, hopefully the utilities are going to say, well, I guess the legislature is not going to come over the hill and save us from our obligation. We're going to have to go do it ourselves like we're obligated to do.
It's amazing, especially when you highlight how it's done in other areas. You know, again, the free market will find a way. If you would just get out of the way, the free market would do it. And that's the astonishing thing. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, our guest. We're going through the weekly top 3. We're on to number 2, the bad. The bad. I should have pulled the good, the bad, and the ugly theme up this morning, but I'd get a ding from YouTube for that, so I won't. But just picture the good, the bad, and the ugly in the background right now. Here we go.
Public enema number 1. Oh, wait, sorry. Enemy. Public enemy number 1, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I refuse to identify with that comment. Welcome back to the program, The Michael Duke Show. Brad Keithley, our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Weekly top 3, we did the good about the legislature, which was mostly the lack of progress on some things. Now we're going on to the bad, which is really bad. If the good was mediocre, the bad is really bad. Brad, what do we got here?
Well, the bad is a mixture of things they didn't do that they should have done and things they did do that they shouldn't have done. So I'll have a little bit of both in here. The major bad out of this session is they didn't pass a structured fiscal plan. Remember when the House majority formed, one of their top 3 items, in fact, the top item was fiscal reform, a fiscal plan. We're going to get you a fiscal plan. They set up a special committee, Ways and Means, chaired by Ben Carpenter, that had the speaker on it and had the chairman of the House Education Committee on it and had the chairman of House Resources on it and had the chairman of House Transportation on it. A power committee, sort of a select committee of the movers and shakers from the other committees, including the speaker. They set up Ways and Means. We're going to pass a fiscal plan. We're going to do what legislatures haven't done since we got into this crisis in the early 2010s, and it all came to nothing. I mean, the only thing that really got out of there that was really helpful was constitutionalizing the PFD. That got to the House. That got through the House Finance Committee, got to the House floor, and then died there. And we'll talk about that in a moment as another bad. But the whole fiscal plan discussion that they started off the session with just went poof in the night. And that leaves us with no fiscal plan, which frankly is what some want, because in the absence of a fiscal plan, the fiscal plan has defaulted to just keep taking PFD cuts, keep spending and keep taking PFD cuts. And that's the fiscal plan. That's the fiscal plan we've come up with. Sort of an ad hoc session to session, whatever justification you need to get you through the additional spending you want to do type of fiscal plan. So to me, the big zero, the big failure of this legislature was to pass a fiscal plan. And I attribute that to both sides, Michael. I mean, when the constitutional amendment made it to the floor, it got a majority, but didn't get the supermajority it requires as a constitutional amendment, because the Democrats, the independents, the House minority didn't vote for it. So they bear some of the blame. But the Republicans bear a huge share of the blame too. We're not going to pass a constitutionalization of the PFD. We're not going to protect the PFD until we have replacement revenues in place. We have long since left the point of no return with respect to being able to balance the budget just on.
Some legislators said that directly, by the way. I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but some legislators said that directly. We're not going to talk about the PFD until we have some other way of revenue, but nobody else was listening because they don't want to, they don't want, no.
And it was a failure of Republicans. We had this super committee at House Ways and Means. Ben put up a proposal to use sales taxes, which is not the perfect solution. It's still regressive, but nonetheless, Ben put up a proposal to use sales taxes. He coupled that with a cut in corporate taxes in an attempt to try to encourage corporate activity in the state. Ben put that up. It couldn't get out of committee. You had this super committee of the speaker and chairs of important committees sitting there saying they were going to pass a fiscal plan, and wouldn't vote for one of the necessary elements of it. When we get to the floor on the constitutional amendment, somebody tries to pull up the sales tax up to the floor to demonstrate that we are going to have a balance. If you constitutionalize the PFD, there are going to be replacement revenues, and so it's not like we're going to suddenly throw everything out the window. We've got a replacement. Republicans voted against that. It was Republicans who defeated the move to bring sales taxes to the floor. So it's shared. I know Republicans are going to say it was Democrats' fault. It wasn't. It was a shared fault between the two. That's the big one. Then on top of that, without having a fiscal plan, we passed huge increases in spending on the backs of additional PFD cuts. The House essentially caved entirely to the Senate. We didn't have the big battle this year between House Finance and Senate Finance that we had last year because the House essentially caved. I mean, the House passed a budget that cut the PFD and agreed to a conference committee report that creates, again, one of these surpluses, what legislators are calling surpluses, which is additional PFD cuts that they haven't appropriated. They're just keeping in reserve. And so they passed these huge increases. They caved in on having surpluses, not using at least the leftover amount for the PFD. Heck, they didn't even do that. They kept the surplus reserve, and so that went down the tubes. They did pass, and these are bad things. They passed an extension of the senior benefits. They passed an extension of the higher education tax credit, and they passed a new child care tax credit, all of which are spending. I mean, tax credits have the word tax in them, but it's sort of two negatives, right? Tax credit equals spending because you're reducing revenues. And you're just having the private sector spend the money and then get a tax credit by not having to pay taxes to the state. And they passed all of that additional spending on top of the huge spending increases they did anyway. They passed the state reserve, the state lending for reserved base loans for Cook Inlet producers. That got incorporated into the transmission bill, the electric transmission bill that was over in the Senate and passed both bodies. And so now we've set up the state to loan money based on reserves, using as collateral reserves the state already owns. It is a Ponzi scheme gone crazy, because now we have producers who have undertaken lease obligations to develop, said, well, we can't live up to those unless you give us more money, So now we have the state loaning them money on top of loans that the state already had given these producers. Blue Crest, Ada had already given them loans. We now have the state loaning money on top of that, based on reserves that the state already owns. The security, if they fail to repay the loans, is the state gets the reserves it already owns back. It just pays more for them. So past the state reserve base, that was a bad failure to address the permanent fund board chaos. The permanent fund board is in chaos. I mean, yesterday there was a meeting. There's an article in Must Read about it, where they're trying to deal with the leak of the emails, and the meeting was focused on how do you stop the leak of the emails, as opposed to, wait a second, isn't there a structural problem with the board, the way the board's pressuring the staff of the permanent fund corporation? Isn't there a problem that way? No, they're more focused on the leak of the emails and on rather than on the undue influence that one of the board members, and perhaps more than one of the board members, are trying to exert on the staff. So the legislature didn't address the permanent fund board chaos. It's not like it's hidden someplace. It's sitting right there in front of everybody in the press. A couple of long-term things that the legislature really, or one long-term thing the legislature really didn't even have a bill to do. Well, it may have had a bill, but it sat in committee, and that is pass campaign finance reform. We are continuing to operate in a situation where the top 20% and others can make unlimited contributions to candidates for office, essentially fund those candidates' elections. One or two or three or four wealthy donors can fund those candidates' elections. Alaska used to have a very democratic system, where democratic and small d system, where you had to get a lot of little donors in order to fund your campaign. You had to reach out and get a broad base among many donors in order to fund your campaign. Now we got a system where 2 or 3 people can fund an entire legislative campaign or a gubernatorial campaign. Bad system. It encourages, it reinforces the fact the top 20% can control the state. And the legislature, a legislature ago, 2 sessions ago, got very close to passing limits, didn't pass at the last minute, never really got any traction in this legislature, and certainly in this session. And I think that's a bad thing. The final thing I've got on the list is the governor once again failed to provide leadership on fiscal issues. Last session, you'll recall, the governor came out in a press conference and said, look, I know we got deficits. I know we need to address this issue. We need to minimize the adverse impact on any one group. We need to broaden the base, and talked about sales taxes. And at least there was some effort in that regard. He didn't even come close to doing that in this session. He just, wherever the heck he was, he just stayed there and never really entered the fray. And it's just leaving. I mean, essentially, the state's being run by the legislature. It's not being run by the governor, and just left the building and allowed the legislature to continue to use PFD cuts without even identifying it now as an issue. So it's yet another session. He was there. Governor was there at the very beginning in the 2019 session when he tried to cut spending. But increasingly, he hasn't been there since. And this session was just sort of the bottom of all that.
Well, and my question is, because Alaska is in a unique position because we do have a very strong governor. And I mean, in a perfect world, if Brad Keithley was governor, would you have started out the year with, here's my budget, and I'm requiring you all to have a fiscal plan, and if I don't see a fiscal plan, then I'm vetoing pretty much everything until you come up with one?
Yeah, that's
is that what needs to happen for strong leadership to be part of it?
Yeah, that's the tool he's got. I mean, the tool he's got is, he has to propose a realistic fiscal plan. His budget this year was just, fairy tales. He has to propose a realistic fiscal plan. But the only tool he's got is to say, I'm going to veto everything unless you get this resolved. And it's a pretty intense tool. And it's a pretty, I believe it would be a pretty effective tool. But it's not a tool he's ever brought out. I mean, in the 2019 session, what he did was line item vetoes. He proposed a budget that essentially was what the state could afford with traditional revenues plus the leftover from the POMV. He proposed that, and then when we got to the end of the session, he tried to line item veto his way back to that. It didn't hold up. Couldn't even get 16 to support him in the legislature to support him. Instead of just sort of, look, you didn't do what I asked you to do. I'm the governor. I'm elected statewide. People elected me to do a job. Here's my job. I'm going to veto this until you get your act together. Put the onus on the legislature. He didn't do that in 2019, and he's certainly not done it since. I mean, there's these occasional stray statements, like last session's statement about, we need to make sure that we don't, impact any one group inappropriately or more than any other. We need to get a broad base, and sales tax is a way to do that. Occasionally get those stray statements like that, but I mean, there wasn't even a stray statement you can hang on to this session.
No. And the problem is that every now and then he does something, that's good, like the last time, the veto of half the increase of the education and some of these other things. But then he comes back with a pie in the sky budget on the come around the next session. And you're like, wait a second. You said all these things about understanding our need and not overspending and everything else, and that you produce a budget that's already in deficits, or you produce these pie in the sky things with carbon tax credits and all these other things and this fallacious voodoo economics on your deal. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, part of this, I would agree, a big part of this is lack of direction from the governor. I mean, this would have been the perfect storm. This year would have been the perfect storm of, it's an election year. They're going to get out. If you threaten to veto everything without a fiscal plan, they probably would have gotten something done, because if not, you're bringing them back for a special session during the summer on an election year, and nobody got time for that. They would have gotten it done ahead of time. But because you didn't demand a fiscal plan, the few people in the legislature who were trying to get it done basically got railroaded from one side to the other.
Yeah, they had no backup from the governor. I mean,
yeah.
I think the House went into the House formed Ways and Means. I think Ben took that chairmanship thinking they were going to get backup from the governor and they were going to come through this and have a plan at the end. And the governor just didn't have their backs. I mean, the Senate, Burt, stands up and bullies them. The Senate last session stands up and bullies them by holding the bills. And the governor basically says at the end, okay, I'll veto a little bit, but okay, if that's the way you want to play the game. And so we saw the consequence of that this session with the House Finance Committee not even really trying to stand up to him.
Final thoughts coming up. Number 3, the election is around the corner. 9 days till filing deadline. What are Brad's thoughts on the upcoming election? We return with more right after this.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for sustainable budgets. You know what the fiscal plan was. It was the 25-75. You stated it several times yesterday. I mean, that was the thing. And I wasn't saying that like that was almost facetious, because that's what people like Gary Stevens kept saying. Well, our plan is 25-75, or in his case, 75-25. But that's not a plan. I was trying to make a point of that is not a plan. The plan is we're going to take all the money. The plan is we're going to take 75% of the money for now, and we'll take that other 25 later down the road when we're out of money. But the problem is it's not a long-term plan, because in 2 years, the 25 will have to go as well. And it'll be 100%. There is no plan. The plan is to spend every dollar that's available until we run out, and then we'll come back to you and force you to pay some kind of tax. That's the plan. Am I wrong, Brad?
No. And Michael, again, I mean, I know we go through this loop, but we're already paying taxes. PFD cuts are taxes. They are the diversion of personal income to the government, diversion of personal income provided by statute, clearly provided by law to the government. That is a tax. Not only me, but Matt Berman, the longest now serving economist at ICER, calls it the same thing. I mean, that is a tax. So the question is, we're going to have to pay a tax after this is all over? We're already paying a tax. Middle and lower income Alaska families are already paying a tax. Top 20% non-residents and the oil companies, to the extent of the additional spending that's going on, aren't paying anything. They aren't contributing to it at all. And so we already have got a tax. It's just a tax that's isolated on middle and lower income Alaska families. We're not even tapping into non-resident income, non-residents, either what they spend in the state or what they earn in the state. We're not tapping into that. The other 49 states, and certainly the District of Columbia, do that. Alaska is the only state that doesn't do that. We're not even doing that. We're just forcing it all on middle and lower income Alaska families. That is the plan. We've already got a tax. Now the issue is when we use up that tax base, when we use up all of the PFD, when we've taxed all of that we possibly can, what happens next? And frankly, what's going to happen next is probably a sales tax that is also regressive, hits middle and lower income Alaska families the hardest. And we're going to layer that on top of the tax they're already paying in terms of PFD cuts. We wonder why we have outmigration, or we wonder why we have a migration issue with respect to working Alaska families. Well, it's because we're taxing the hell out of them. both in terms of the PFDs that we're taking now and in terms of the prospect of where we're going after we run through the PFD tax base. So it's a plan, maybe, but it's a plan. It's a plan for failure. It's a plan that's designed to keep the top 20% and non-resident and non-residents and oil out of the loop, out of responsibility, not only now, but as much as they can into the future. And it's a bad plan. How about that? We may have a plan, but it's a bad plan.
It is. And Ron kind of hits the nail on the head, because we've said this several times. He says Stevens and the rest of those who took the whole PFD will be gone and living in another state when it's all said and done. They don't count now. Why would they care then? I mean, this has been a problem. This has been a problem in the legislature for years. Many legislators who make these raw fiscal ideas and make these decisions that are painful in the long term, maybe beneficial in the short term, but painful in the long term. And then they up and retire and they leave and they go to another state. So they don't care. They're not going to pay the price on that.
But here's the point. The Republicans have to step up. If the Republicans don't like that, the Republicans have to step up and do something about it in terms of replacement revenues, because we've long since passed the point where we can fund the government that we've built through traditional revenues from oil and through the remainder of the POMV after the statutory PFDs paid for. Long since past that point. We ain't going back there. And so the Republicans, if they really believe in this issue, and this is where I have a problem with a lot of Republicans anymore, to tell you the truth, because they mouth these words. Oh, we got to restore the PFD, respect the law. We got to abide by the current law. They mouth those words, but they don't follow through with the replacement revenues that are necessary to make those words come true. It's right. Oh, I'll tell you what you want to hear, but over here on the side, I'm not going to do what it takes to actually deliver what I'm telling you that you want to hear. And to me, the Republicans are as much at fault on this issue as the Democrats.
No, I mean, I totally agree at this point. And for all those Republicans that are out there straining at the bit about, socialism and everything else. Hey, Jack, I didn't write the Constitution. And in fact, the PFD is the one capitalistic issue that can be utilized against the communistic issue of this collective ownership. But, hey, you do you. It's your lie. You tell it. That's how you go. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3, the deep dive. Usually a pain-inducing lesson of pain. It's rhetorical. Brad, number 3, 9 days till the filing deadline for the upcoming election. Some of the lines have been drawn. 40 House members and 10 of the 20 senators are up for re-election. So a big chunk of both bodies up there, big chunk of the legislature as a whole. What are your thoughts on the upcoming election? What are you seeing? What are you thinking right now?
Well, one of the things that struck me as I look through the list is there's a lot of races that don't have opponents yet, or a lot of races that don't have, quality opponents, well-funded opponents in those races. So if we don't change the players, to use a term that you've used before on the show, if we don't change the players, it's sort of foolish to think we're going to change the outcome in future legislatures, particularly when the governor doesn't stand up. So we elected the governor to stand up. He's not standing up. So it's up to the legislature. The legislature's running the state. If we don't have opponents to the people who are in the legislature now, then we're not going to get any change in results. So part of the issue I see ahead is there really going to be candidates to support that are going to change the dynamics? One or two here. Big race to me is Ben Carpenter's challenge to Jesse Bjorkman in the Kenai for that Senate seat, the Senate seat that Bjorkman now holds. We've got a quality candidate there that would make a huge change in where that seat's going. Theoretically, it's Republican on Republican, but Bjorkman is a spend Republican. If he's a Republican at all, it's just a spendican Republican, and Ben would certainly be a big change there. But that's more the exception than the rule in the number of races we see out there. So part of the issue is part of my outlook is, are we really going to have an opportunity to make changes, or are we just going to, or by default, are we just going to sort of end up where we already are? To me, the three issues that I'm going to ask candidates, or I'm going to be looking at what candidates say about this in the race, are: one, what's your fiscal plan? Who pays, and what do you want to spend, and do you have offsets in mind? I mean, there's going to be races in Anchorage, state house races in Anchorage. I mean, the Democrats are gearing up to run strong races in Anchorage, and there are going to be candidates who say, I want to spend more. I want K through 12. I'm running to fully fund K through 12 to make a permanent increase in the BSA. My question to them is going to be, who pays? I mean, how are you going to pay for that? And if they mumble around and mope around, then clearly they have in mind the PFD paying, middle and lower income Alaska families. They don't want their top 20% donors or them themselves, when they become top 20% by virtue of being elected to the legislature. They're going to be essentially status quo. So there's no real thrill electing more people into the status quo we've got. By the same token, on Republicans, I mean, the question is, it's the same question to them: who pays? We got Republicans out there who are going to say we ought to be, we ought to be holding the line on spending. That's fine, but we're still in a huge deficit that we've been covering with PFD cuts. Are you, the Republican candidate, are you going to continue to use PFD cuts to fund those deficits that we've got and will continue to have? And if they mumble around, then the answer is, well, they're part of the problem too. And we're going to have races out there, Michael, where both candidates are part of the problem. Democrats are saying, I want to make a permanent increase to the BSA. I want to do changes to defined benefits, increase spending that way, and who will mumble around when asked who pays. And then we got Republicans who say, well, I want to hold the line on spending, but I don't want anybody else to pay. And so we're going to have these races that are just sort of useless in terms of changing the dynamic. Yeah, right. we may hold back spending a little bit, but we're still going to be doing it at the expense of middle and lower income Alaska families. So that's issue one. Issue two. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just going to say that, and a prime example of that again goes back to your talking about the 2018, 2019, when he couldn't get 16 Republicans. The governor couldn't get 16 Republicans to back up his vetoes because they're like, "Oh, I'm all for cuts, just not in my backyard."
Yeah, exactly right. And it's just, that's sort of what we've we've fallen into this policy of 25-75 by Republicans in part by Republicans failing to propose alternative substitute revenues. And if that's, and if we're going to have Republican candidates who claim to be fiscal conservatives, but candidates who are not prepared to step up and say, we need alternative revenues, replacement revenues, here's what I propose. If we have candidates who are not prepared to do that, then they're sort of, to use a term I'll regret later, they're sort of worthless candidates. I mean, they're not going to move the ball forward. We're just going to keep the ball where it is.
Right.
Second issue, what's your approach to the Cook Inlet? I mean, we're going to have a lot of people, screaming about we have an emergency, that we have a crisis, we need to do something, and they'll come up with all sorts of different ideas on how to do it. It's going to be a defining issue to me, whether we have people who believe in the free market or we have people who, want government intervention. And again, the real oddity of this particular issue is we have Republicans who are pushing forward on intervention. George Rauscher to pick one, Tom McKay to pick another, who are pushing forward on, well, government has to do something, and so we're going to give government money away in order to do it. We're going to subsidize the result we want. And we have Democrats, Donna Mears being a good example, who are saying, no, let's let the free market work. I mean, let's not spend. I mean, they say let's spend on other things, but at least on this particular issue, they stand up and they say let's let the free market work. So that to me is also going to be a defining issue. Do we have real free market candidates in this state, or do we have free market up until the time I really want to subsidize somebody, candidates? The third thing is, what's your position on campaign finance reform? I think, it didn't get addressed a lot in this legislature, but I think campaign finance reform is a huge issue. The fact that we can have, millionaires and billionaires funding candidates directly, just funding campaigns directly, I think is a huge problem. After you get elected, who are you gonna listen to? Who are you gonna pay attention to? The guy who funded your campaign, right? You may say that you're going to be looking for input from other areas, but the guy who funded your campaign, or the 2 guys or 3 guys or 4 guys that funded your campaign, is who you're going to be listening to the most. We used to have a very democratic system with fairly strict funding limits, which required that you go out and get a broad base of support, and that you had to explain yourself to a broad base, and that you had to, convince a broad base of people to support you in terms of dollars. And so when you got elected, you weren't focused on 1 or 2 people. You had a broad base that you had to respond to. Now we've got a system which allows 1 or 2 to step in and essentially buy either senatorial or representative seats, or buy the governorship essentially. And I just think that's a very bad system. We need to re-democratize our funding system. What happened was the Ninth Circuit said those limits were too low. They impeded freedom of speech, but they didn't say you couldn't have any limits. They said you had to modernize the limits, take into account inflation, to get up to a certain level. We need to do that. We should have done that the day after the Ninth Circuit issued the decision. We should have done it last legislature. We need to do that. That needs to be an important part of what the legislature is doing. Re-democratize the field. And frankly, I think that would help the PFD issue. I think it'd help the fiscal issue if people had to reach out to middle income Alaska families to help fund their campaigns. So I think that's a third issue that I'm going to be looking for in terms of the campaign.
We're down to the last minute here. I want to give you the last word, Brad. I don't know if you had any more, but give us your final thoughts here as we wrap things up.
My final thoughts is, A, are we going to get candidates? We'll know that in 9 days. B, once we get the candidates, are they going to be the right candidates that push for changes in the things that have gone wrong? And those are the 3 issues I'm going to be looking at to decide whether we have good candidates.
Well, it's a little disappointing to see some of the same candidate slates come up again and again, especially with the business as usual crowd, in a lot of cases facing no challengers in their races, which is disappointing to say the least. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Brad, thank you so much for coming on board. We appreciate it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we're out of time for hour 1. We got a little bit of recap, and then Harmony Tomaszewski talking about GVEA. Back with more. Again, even a stop clock is right twice a day, and Harold, I think, nails it here. 16,055 PFD versus 22,000 per capita government spending. That's the issue. That's what we've been trying to talk about for a long time. And yet, the size and scope of government, right-sizing government, and yet nobody, you get people like Bert Stedman saying we couldn't cut another dollar. You get, people saying we couldn't possibly live in a smaller footprint. And candidates who say that they want a full PFD, and some of them really truly do, I believe it, but they're a vast minority in the legislature. Even the left-leaning progressive legislators representing some of the most, the poorest districts in the state are not standing up for a PFD for their constituency. The people who you would think would be fighting tooth and nail for that, $3,000, $4,000 dividend for their low-income people who are making $20,000 a year would make a significant difference in their lives. And they're saying, no, they're too stupid to do it on their own. We need to guide their money, and that money needs to come to government so we can take care of them. That's what it's coming down to.
We have no incentives to keep spending under control. The incentives go the opposite way. Legislature has no incentive, no personal incentive. They're all in the top 20% by virtue of the raise that they voted themselves. Their donors, because we don't have campaign finance limits, they're donors who maybe 3 or 4 people don't have incentives to reduce spending because they don't pay for it. The oil companies don't have incentives to push back on spending because they don't pay for it. Non-resident industries, fishing, tourism, the like, don't have incentives to push back on spending. All the incentives are on increasing spending because, you were pointing out Zach Fields, a person who represents a fairly low income district, but nevertheless, pushes for PFD cuts. The incentives are to increase spending on government because either A, Zach Fields' unions are the beneficiary of that, or B, another representative's construction companies are the beneficiary of that, or C, government employees generally are the beneficiary of that. That's where the incentives are, because then that generates campaign support among the construction company owners, among the government employee unions, among the other trade groups. It generates support among them for their election, because we don't have campaign finance reform, and because those donors, we've set up a system where those donors don't have to pay. So the incentives are all screwed up. I mean, Alaska virtually alone, because we don't have a broad-based tax, the only state that doesn't have a broad-based tax, virtually alone, we incentivize growth in government, both among donors and among representatives and among legislators. We incentivize the growth of government. We don't incentivize constraints on government. And until we get that, until we change, until we have campaign finance reform and require that people go back to raising money from, a broad group of people for their candidacy, until we have, an obligation on the part of the top 20% and non-resident industries and the oil companies to sort of, pay something. And so a pushback on spending as a result. Until we change those incentives, we're going to keep going down this road. It's all about incentives. It's all about the economic incentives that we've created in this state with respect to spending. And all the incentives are on the side of increased spending as opposed to pushing back.
Well, and again, you're alluding to that disconnect between the private and public sector, where the public sector is protected at all costs and the private sector is not even an afterthought. It's just there. If it survives, great. If it doesn't, great, because it doesn't matter to us. We're in the government and we have direct access to all the money and we can do whatever we want. And that's a unique situation that Alaska's in that no other state is facing. And we don't have the political will to address that issue. Everybody could talk about a fiscal plan, but until somebody actually does something, here we are.
Yep, exactly right. I mean, everybody does talk about it. I mean, Republicans complain about, oh my gosh, that spending's out of control. But then they vote for things. I mean, they vote to finance it by PFD cuts. They vote to finance it in a way that, or they vote to finance their campaigns in a way that where they don't have to really worry about a broad base of donors. The Republicans talk a good game, but they don't follow through on it. Oddly enough, the Democrats don't talk a good game, but sometimes they follow through on the right things.
Right.
So it's a screwed up state. One final sort of example of how screwed up we are. There's a new article out, or a new book out on the benefits of ranked choice voting, and one of the chapters is on Kathy Giessel and on Alaska, and using Kathy Giessel as an example of the great things of ranked choice voting and the great things of bipartisanship. One of the most important lessons I learned with my involvement with the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget at the federal level is that bipartisanship just really means both sides get to spend and somebody else pays for it. At the federal level, Republicans and Democrats, I mean, they sort of talk about it differently, but they both they want to spend, but they don't want to pay for it. And so the way we handle that is through debt. We push it off on future generations. In Alaska, we don't push it off on debt. We push it off on middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts. And so bipartisanship is really just, we both agree we want to spend, but neither of us want to pay for it. So can we find somebody to dump these costs on? And they've done that both at the federal level in terms of debt, taxes on future generations, and in Alaska, PFD cuts, taxes on middle and lower income Alaska families. We've got to change the system.
We've got to change the system. Absolutely. And that's something we've been fighting for in this program for 25 years, unfortunately. Nobody's listening, it seems like. I mean, there's a few of you listening, obviously, but nobody that's making a difference at this point, which is frustrating. Brad, thank you so much. As always, it's good to talk with you, my friend.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we got to go. We're going to continue the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Recap up next, then hour 2.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the program, the Tuesday edition of the show. We just finished up with Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and the weekly top 3, the good, the bad about the legislature, the ugly of the upcoming election season, and what do we see? And well, I mean, I'll just say it's not encouraging in a lot of ways, because we have the same problems that we've had for the last, 2 decades. They just become even more exacerbated than they have been in the past. And here we are, trying to decide how do we fix this? How do we get these things corralled? How do we make it happen? And we cannot change out the players that need to be changed out. And I'm talking about people like Bert Stedman and Kathy Giesel and Click Bishop and Gary Stevens, some of the old guard that have been in there for years that understand the system and game the system. We've got legislators in there that cannot discern between the public economy and the private economy. In fact, to them, in some cases, the private economy just doesn't even exist. I mean, yesterday, our conversation with Ben Carpenter, where he said he had a conversation with a Democratic legislator who said he didn't looked at him quizzically and said, "What do you mean? The government economy, the public spend, the state budget is the economy. Like they are the master orchestrators and architects of all the economy in the legislature, that the private economy is not even an afterthought. It's not even if it survives, great. If it doesn't, okay. That's how they're acting. We have no connection with the private economy in the state of Alaska unless it's in some way tangentially or whatever connects to the public economy. It just doesn't matter. What difference does it make? That's what it comes down to. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have right now. And it's something that Hammond was seriously concerned about. I mean, quite honestly, that was the genesis of the permanent fund itself. And then later on, the reason for the permanent fund dividend was because Hammond could see that they were, they had been consumed in the Juneau bubble of they were just, they were just going to spend what they could spend, and it didn't matter what happened in the private economy. I mean, I just want to give you a glimpse as to what it looked like when they received that first nearly $1 billion royalty check, $900 million and change, from the oil companies in 1969, 1970. At the time, the state government was the budget for the whole state was like $162 million. $162 million. Now, For comparatives, let's just say, okay, that was 1969, 1970. So, what does that mean in today's dollars? Well, $162 million. Let's just say that in 1969, you could buy a brand new Mustang Mach 1 Fastback for $3,600. That's what the price was. I know because that was one of my favorite cars when I was growing up. 1969, you could buy a brand new Mach 1 Fastback for Mustang for $3,600. Today, that car costs about 20 times what it did then. Okay? So 36,000 now up to 60, 70,000 bucks for a brand new, off the line, high speed, top of the line Mustang is about $65,000-$70,000, right, for that car, same car. So 20 times what it costs. Well, if we had increased the size and scope of state government 20 times, that $162 million would be about $3 billion. And instead, we're spending almost $6 billion plus all the federal money. I mean, it has just grown out of control and out of proportion with all things. I mean, this is it. It is horrific what's gone on in this state government, with absolutely no thought or declination towards what the private economy is going to do and how does this benefit and everything else. It all has to do with how do we protect the public spend, because the public spend is the economy. And yes, there are plenty of Republicans out there. We were talking earlier about, we were trying to decide, are they Republicrats? Are they Democrats? They're Spendicans or Spendocrats, one of the two. It doesn't matter what party they belong to. They are the party of spend. So Spendicans and Spendocrats, they're all part of the same party. We had legislators that were all paying lip service to the idea that they could live within their means. I mean, when I got down to the Anchorage area, when I first brought the show down to Anchorage, and there was a lot of discussion. ICER had just come out with their report in 2014, 2015 about, hey, if we want to hold government in check and do all this kind of stuff, we have to hold the spend at about $3.9 billion. And then it went up to $4.1 billion the next year. And we asked all those legislators, can you agree with that? Can you do it? Oh, yes. I mean, we can do that. That is, that's a great, yes, we can do that. And it was all just lip service. It didn't matter. In the end, they just spent, they never even looked back. It wasn't even a speed bump. The 4.1 billion mark was just like not even a speed bump. They're like, oh yeah, that was nice, but here we go. It just doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter as long as the government spend is protected. It is definitely, it's all good as long as the state spend is protected. That is what they would consider to be a good fiscal plan. I mean, to them, that is the fiscal plan, right? Gary Stevens getting up there and saying the plan is 25-75. Doesn't matter that it's a short-term plan. Doesn't matter that in 2 years, maybe 3, that additional 25% will be needed because they've consumed all of the 75% and then some. And that in 2 to 3 years, they'll have to come back again, and the fiscal plan is now to be 100% of the POMV draw has to go to government. That doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. You didn't need that money anyway, right? I mean, we know better than you how that money should be spent. You can't be trusted. Free rides die hard. You live in the bush. You'll just spend it on whiskey and whatever, right? I mean, this is commentary from some of the legislators actually saying things like this. You can't be trusted with that money. I mean, regardless of the fact that many of us used that money for years to pay for things like, I don't know, winter tires, heating oil for the house for the winter, winterization, putting clothes on the kids' backs for school, or buying food, or, paying off the houses or whatever it is. I mean, why, what? And I'm disappointed because a lot of these people are going to go in with absolutely no challengers. No challengers at all. And I mean, to say that's disappointing is unbelievable. And the only thing I can conclude is that the constituents in those areas, the electorate in those areas, are happy with this spend mentality. Maybe as long as they get theirs, as long as they get their own, they're fine. Kevin McCabe asked the question, what about constituents who are demanding spend in their districts, from fire stations to plowing to paving roads to bridge repair? Well, first and foremost, my question is, there's two parts to that statement. What about the constituents who are demanding spend in their districts is the first statement. We'll come back to that in a second. But then the examples up from fire stations to plowing to paving roads to bridge repair. That is a basic function of state government. Infrastructure, bridge repair, paving roads, plowing, that kind of stuff. That's a basic function of state government outlined in the Constitution, that infrastructure. Fire stations are part of the public safety, also a basic premise of the Constitution. The question is, what are all the other things that we're doing that we're spending money on when we should be spending money on those things? Why did it become a laundry list of all these other nice to haves, and then people have to demand spending in their districts for the must haves, things that are mandated by the Constitution? So what we have there is a prioritization problem. There's a priority, and the priority should be those things mandated by the Constitution to begin with. Public health and safety, fire, police, those kind of things, and infrastructure, paving, roads, snow plowing. It's all part of infrastructure. So you're right, Kevin. What about constituents who are demanding spend in their districts? Again, the first question that should be asked by any politician who has somebody come up to them and say, I want you to spend $35 million on a brand new puppy palace. The question should be, who pays? Okay, that's great. Where do we get the money from? Do we take the money from the fire stations and from the plowing and the paving and the roads and the bridge repair? I mean, those things should be getting first call on all the money. All the infrastructure, the public safety, all those should all be getting first call on everything, because that's what allows the state to run. Roads are the backbone of commerce and everything else. Those are the things that make the state run at a fundamental level. Those are the things that are mandated. And if we've left those to the back burner, and now we're fighting over the last few shekels over whether or not we can plow a road, that is a prioritization problem. But if a constituent comes to you and says, we need to spend more on X, the question needs to be, okay, how do we pay for it? Who pays? Now, my answer to that, if I was God King for the day and given the magic scepter to do whatever the hell I wanted, I would say, well, we're going to look at exactly what the state constitution mandates, all the public health and the safety, the infrastructure, and yes, even education. That stuff all gets spent at a reasonable level with accountability. And then if there's any other money left over, then we can look at your nice to have things that you have out there, the child care and all the other pooshwa that we talk about that's built into some of these budgets. But other than that, we'll let the free market sort it out. Oh, but you'd lose a bunch of people. People would lose their jobs. Well, that's a sad thing, but that's the way of the world. That's how it works. Nobody in the private sector just protects jobs for the sake of protecting jobs, because if they don't make any money, everybody loses their job. All right. Okay. I got to go. I got to stop talking about this before I get a little pissy. All right. We're going to continue the Michael Duke Show. Harmony Tomaszewski's up next. We're going to talk about her run for GVEA board. Oh, man. Don't even get me started on the long trail, Kevin. Somebody's asking questions about the long trail. $3.1 million this year for the long trail. Oh, I got some words that I'm not allowed to say on radio over that. All right, we're going to be back with more Harmony Tomaszewski up next. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're going to get ready. Michael needs to hike more. Why? Why do I need to hike more? What would that, to appreciate the millions of dollars they're going to invest in the long trail? Well, I mean, I hike. I've been hiking a lot more these last 2 years, but I'm still not hiking 200 miles north towards Fairbanks. I mean, that's, and I'm not all about the millions of dollars that are going to be invested. No, just not going to do it. No. All right. Let's see. They demand spending, but the legislative mantra is, we know better than you. Can that be applied here? Yes. I mean, that's exactly what's going on. We know better than you. You can't be trusted to spend your own money. You might spend it on hookers and blow, or a vacation to Hawaii and a big screen TV, or you might spend it on alcohol because you live in a village. I mean, these are things that people have said in the legislature on the floor. If I said it, I would be, I just did say, but I was repeating it, what they said. I would be, but no, they're the legislature. They've got it covered. Don't worry about it. We know better than you how this stuff goes. All right. Well, I got to stop talking about this because it's pissing me off. All right, let's go over here and do something. Change gears a little bit here. Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest this morning. We're going to talk about the GVEA board and what's going on in Fairbanks. And she joins us this morning. Hello, how are you?
Hi, great. Thanks for having me today.
Well, thanks for coming on board. I know we're getting close here, and this election is meaningful. I think it's interesting. All of these elections for these various electricity and utility boards are useful and interesting, and they've actually become more partisan and gotten a little bit more visibility. The Chugach board just got their election done, and I know that HEA has been working on some of the stuff there as well. People I think are getting more involved because obviously energy is a critical issue, and the cost of it is what's killing us in many ways. So, I would love to get more details on this. So we're going to dive into this here in just a minute, okay?
Thanks. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm sorry, you say something? Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You're right. It's so important. It's a critical issue. And I'm really excited because we actually did find out numbers from this Friday of how many have been submitted so far. And we do have our 10%, which is pretty impressive for up here. So that's a sad thing to be happy about, that we only have 10%
voter return, a 10% ballot return. That's a pretty high return.
So far.
Yeah, I will be the first to admit there were many years when I did not return my GVEA ballot, because I wasn't paying attention to it. I was just like, it's high. I don't know if I could do anything about it, and I don't know it. I just didn't have the bandwidth for it. So it's a good thing. So, all right. Well, we will continue here in just a minute. Then, Harmony, hold the line. We'll be right back to you. Okay. All right. Harmony Tomaszewski, our guest here as we get ready to go. All right. 3 years ago, the Long Trail had an original cost of $14 million. How much is it now? Well, according to this article from the ADN, Amy Bouchatz over at the ADN wrote an article about it. The BLM is now spending $1 million to study the trail to see if they want to designate it as a national scenic trail. And they're saying that it is going to, I don't know, cost. They didn't give an actual cost. They said $9 million has already been spent on it since 2022. Part of that, 3.1 of that is the 3.1 million approved by the legislature last week. So they approved. I thought it was just $1 million. No, it's 3.1 million for the long trail. How much is it going to be? More than the 14 million. I guarantee you that. More than the 14 million for sure. So we'll see about that. All right, we're jumping back into it. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Let's get it going on here. Harmony Tomaszewski, our guest. We will continue right now. Let's do it. Okay, continuing on now, a little bit of a change of pace. I was just talking during the break and discussing the fact that it seems to me that the positions on a lot of these utility boards across the state are getting a little more visibility, a little more contentiousness. I know that there have been a lot of advertising going on for the board memberships at the Chugach Electric Association board. And now, of course, happening in Fairbanks. I know HEA down in Homer has had a lot more exposure. And let's face it, a lot of times we're just not paying attention to this. Sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth, but they are important. It's an important thing to do, and we need to discuss it. Joining us this morning is Harmony Tomaszewski. She is a candidate for the GVEA board in District 4, which includes all of downtown Fairbanks, north of Airport Way, east of Pegger Road, up in the Chena River, Island Homes, Hamilton Acres, Shannon Park, Birchwood Homes, all the area of the Steese Highway up towards Fox and Goldstream and Steel Creek, all the way out to Pleasant Valley on the Chena Hot Springs Road. It's a huge area. And Harmony is running for the board, advocating for lower rates and common sense. She joins us this morning to discuss this run and why it's important and what got her started, and we welcome her to the program. Good morning, Harmony.
Good morning. Thank you. I appreciate being here and being able to discuss this. So many people haven't paid attention over the years, and it really affects every one of us, every home. And yet it seems like such a big thing. And so we just kind of have this voter apathy where we haven't paid attention. We don't think we can affect that change. And we don't know enough about it. So we just don't vote because we're afraid to do something wrong, but we don't take the time to do the research to do something right either.
Right.
So this has been really a little bit more work. It's getting out there and trying to get people to be interested and to get involved and to do the homework. But I'm excited. It's been great. I've been out knocking doors, talking to people. I've had some great conversations, and I've had some really unusual conversations and things I think, I wasn't expecting that. So I think it's really important to get involved, and I really appreciate you letting me come out here and talk about it, because at this point we did get our 10%, which means yes, the ballots will be opened, and that is a huge step for Golden Valley, for this district, that we're going to be paying attention, that we are able to open those ballots and see what the people have said. But I want to go the next step. I want to get more people, get that ballot off of your counter, vote, and mail it in. So many people I talk to right now have that ballot. They received it. It's sitting in that pile on their counter, and it's still sitting there. And
Right.
It's got to be received by June 4th. So
So let's talk about that for a second. I mean, you have 10% return is what you're talking about. So 10% of the ballots from the eligible ratepayers have been turned in. Now, if you hadn't hit that 10%, they just don't open the ballots? I mean, what happened?
just don't open the ballots. That's part of the bylaws that they have. And so if we had not received that 10%, they would not have opened them. The incumbent would automatically have won another 3 years. Yes.
Wow. So it's an automatic win for the incumbent no matter what, if it goes on here. Harmony, let's talk for a minute here about why you decided to begin with. Because, I mean, we were just talking during the break, and I admitted there were several times when I wasn't paying attention to the race, and I just didn't turn my ballot in because I didn't feel like I knew enough about what was going on, and it didn't seem that important to me. But it is important, especially in this day and age. Brian makes a comment in the chat room, which I think portrays part of the reason why it's important these days as opposed to 10 or 15 years ago. He said from his foray into MEA, the Matanuska Electric Association, he said, I came to realize that most of the candidates have no understanding of power or power systems, but they're all about climate change because it's trendy. And I would say that there probably are a bunch of candidates out there who are on the board simply for the idea of pushing, renewables, green, sustainable, all these other things, regardless of the cost to the ratepayer or anything else. And I think that is a danger, and we do need to be paying attention to it. But talk to us about why you decided to jump into this race. What was the premise? What was the impetus to get you out the door?
So to actually jump into the board race, I care too much about the people and about that we're not being represented. And I just, I feel like you've got to care about the people and how the rates are affecting us, and that people are having to make choices between electrical and heat or food. And that's crazy. And I know that there's no magic button. There's nothing that's going to just go and cut your rates in half or is going to fix everything. But there are small changes and directions that we can go in that would help. And when I was on the member advisory committee, I was there from 2019 until this last fall. And I've heard repeatedly from different people, different sources, that they're willing to pay more for green energy. And I'm not. We've passed that point. It's not okay. We should just do the math. It shouldn't be hard. We should just follow the facts, do the math. What makes sense? What's good for the ratepayer? There's been some choices that I don't agree with that the board has made collectively. There are good people on the board. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anyone, but it's just we need to put the focus back on people. We need to put that first and how it's going to affect them, and not making decisions to feel good or possibly this will work. Let's stick with facts and math.
Well, and because it's a problem. I mean, this is like one of those proverbial self-licking ice cream cones. I'm willing to pay more for green energy. Okay, well, maybe you are, but what about everybody else? Have you made it less affordable to live here? Are you driving more people out? More people get driven out. The production costs now are spread out amongst a smaller pool of people, so the rates go up even more, which drives more people out, which makes the pool even smaller, which drive the rates up even more. I mean, at what point do you reach that diminishing returns where you're like, this is going to be unaffordable in the long run? I mean, green energy and renewables are a great idea, but how do they pencil out economically in the long run? Can they make it affordable? Cheap energy is the basis of civilization, right? I mean, the basis of modern civilization is based on affordable energy. And if it's not affordable, people will pull up stakes and go somewhere where it is. Where they're not paying 35 cents a kilowatt hour, they're paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour. That's just mathematics and economics. And if they don't understand that in pursuit of an ideal, don't get tripped up over the good for the great, right? You're searching for the great or that perfect ideal, and you're leaving a perfectly good idea laying in the dirt that would affect more people in the long run.
Right. If it works, if it's green energy and it pencils out and the numbers are there, that's awesome. We want cheap and reliable energy. So that's great, but we've just got to do the numbers and make sure it's working. And I also don't want this tunnel vision of just going to one type of energy and missing other opportunities, because there have been other opportunities that we need to go through and decide if it works or if it doesn't. I ran into a lady a couple weeks ago, and she told me that she disagreed with me. There's always poor people, and we need to turn the coal off right now. And it didn't matter if we had enough energy for people. There were always issues, and there was always going to be a problem, and we just needed to turn it off now. And that just doesn't make sense. People, we need energy, we need it reliable, we need it affordable. We can't just stop having energy.
So what she said was, let the poor people die or go to the poorhouses and reduce the surplus population. She basically did a Scrooge on you. She did an Ebenezer Scrooge, right? I mean, there's always going to be poor people and there's always going to be a problem. Just turn it off. Except we're not living in California. We're living in Alaska, where you will die if you don't have energy to keep your house running and keep your things warm. So, I mean, what kind of mindset is that?
And unfortunately, she's not the only one that said it to me. I've had a few conversations similar to that. And so, that's really concerning. We need to take care of one another and make sure that we are doing our best to make good decisions to have that affordable and reliable energy. So, but I've also met a lot of great people that really care and that want to make good decisions and that want to see a change. The incumbent I'm running against has been there 9 years. And he said, oh, yeah, he wants, good rates and affordable and reliable. Well, you've been there 9 years and it's not going the direction that we think it should be going in. So we need to make a change. We need a balance on that board. And I think I can bring that.
So the impetus was you just couldn't sit back anymore. Now, you were on the advisory board ahead of time, right? So you have some background on this. We got about 3 minutes here before we go to break. What did that entail, being on the advisory board to the main? Is that to the main board? Is that what the advisory board does?
So there's a member advisory committee, and you have presentations and information, education, and the board comes and does a presentation. You learn about the systems and the way everything works and goes together, and it's just a great opportunity for members to get involved and learn and understand. Because I was on that board and I was the chair for 3 years on that board, I was also the chair of the Community Solar Task Force. So I got to do a lot of research on that and a lot more information from Golden Valley, working together with that. I was also on the Climate Action Committee on the second group, and I've had an electrical business. So I've been involved in energy. I've been paying attention, been doing my research, been learning. Um, you know, there are certificates that you would get that if elected on the board, you go and do these classes and get the certificates. But I have a deep background in business admin. I understand the numbers, I understand the processes, um, and we just need to start looking at the numbers and understanding and moving forward.
Right. Again, it's great to have an ideal of renewable green energy, windmills and solar panels and geothermal or whatever, hydro, whatever we want to do. The problem is, of course, is that in the long run, it all has to pencil out for the ratepayers and not make it exorbitant to where people decide to move. Again, that negative reinforcement loop of people leaving and creating a smaller and smaller pool of ratepayers to be able to afford that bill. The woman's comment of, well, people are just going to be poor anyway, so let them go. The problem is that those people are shouldering a portion of the burden for everyone, and the more people leave, the more expensive it will be, unsustainable for everyone in the long run, and nobody seems to take that component into account.
Right. Well, and you know that hydropower is actually our cheapest power here in Fairbanks. Bradley Lake is our cheapest energy. And it's a fabulous energy. We love being able to get it and we want more. And then coal is our second, and it goes from there. So there's been people have talked about biomass energy in Indiana. There's been a lot of discussions of different things. And I think we just really need to be open to what works and
Right.
not keep constraining ourselves arbitrarily over ideals. We just need
Right.
to look and say, does this work? How does it work? Is it going to be reliable? Is it efficient? And is it cheap?
Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest. We're going to continue with her here in just a second. We're talking about the board for Golden Valley Electric Association, GVEA, up in the interior. I'm sure there are similar, elections going on in your neck of the woods, whether it's HEA or MEA or CEA, all the various outlets out there. We're all facing the same question. How do we avoid the good in pursuit of the perfect, so to speak? We need to be looking at those good options to make it affordable in the short term, because those long-term options may not ever come to pass. We'll continue with more. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break right now. Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest. And one thing maybe when we return, we could talk about, Alaska's unique climatic conditions. Solar, great for sunny CA, right? Great for California, great for Vegas and New Mexico and, these places where they're getting lots of sun all the time. We can get some sun and solar can offset some gains, but it's not a year-round answer. Same problem with wind. We've got problems with the GVEA's own wind farm can only provide a small portion of it, and it's unreliable in terms of consistent output because it's Mother Nature. You just don't know when the wind is going to blow. And so we have to have something that's a baseline to make these things work. And of course, the other problem you run into is the not in my backyard thing. Oh, yes, wind's great. Oh, my God, do not put up a propeller in the back of my backyard. Okay, well, which is it that you want? You want green renewable energy or you want your view shed? What is it that you want to have? And I think people are, they're conflicted. They contradict themselves all the time in these kind of things. And we see that in the arguments.
Yeah, we have to have the base load. We have to have something that's going to carry you through. These reliables are not always consistent. And so at this point, we don't have the batteries that will hold that power for long enough. They're looking at a new battery system and that would hold 12 hours, but we don't have that yet. And even so the wind doesn't blow for 13 hours, what's going to happen? We have to have a consistent base load, maybe use some of these renewables because they fluctuate. We can't have them as our base. So at least at this time, maybe technology, it just keeps moving and going. So let's look at it then, but let's look realistically at what we have available now, what's working in our Arctic conditions.
I've never understood this whole thing, because like you talk about, Bradley Lake produces a ton of electricity. Hoover Dam, over 100 years old, still providing some of the cheapest energy in the country to the 400 square miles around it or whatever it is, something like 4 cents a kilowatt hour. It's yes, I know the environmentalists are screaming at the radio right now because, oh my God, you're talking about a dam but it is consistently the cheapest, most affordable energy in the long term of any type of, whether it's Watana, whether it's the Terror Lake, whether it's Bradley Lake. Why aren't we building more of these to produce cheap, reliable, affordable, long-term, 100+ year energy sources? We've got the cleanest coal in the world. Why aren't we developing more ideas? Because again, it's become de rigueur, right? Oh no, coal is just filthy and dirty. It's it's just one of those. It just blows my mind.
Right. Well, we had an opportunity, was it 84, early 80s, where we could have had the Susitna Dam, right? And there's talk about it now, But then we just went to a bazaar here in Fairbanks, and there was a booth set up about no Susitna. So there's people that don't like that either, but we have to make some decisions for all of Alaska, not just Fairbanks, but we have to make decisions of how we can move forward and what we can do because it's hard to live here. As you know, we just went through that election. They were trying to raise the property tax again, and at some point we can't afford to be here between just our utilities, our fuel, our electric, our property taxes, the food, transportation. It's hard. And we've got to start figuring out long-term solutions to make it easier.
Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest. You could see her website below there if you're trying to figure out how to spell her name. It's down there below her name there. You can go to her website. I'll post a link in the chat room right now so that you guys can have it, and you can tell all your friends about it. Go out there and do it. Let's see. Someone is... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Since you mentioned friends, really that's what I'm trying to do here is do a grassroots. Just try to get from person to person because it's so hard. District 4 is very unusual. When we think of districts, we think of our regular election. We think, I live in District 34. There's voting elections and 32. And District 4 for Golden Valley is actually a combination of 2, maybe 3 different voting areas. So we really need people to tell their friends and to tell their community to vote because it's just not enough anymore to just vote yourself. It's not enough anymore to just acknowledge it. We have to get involved more and be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
The only way people are going to care about it is if you care individually and then you keep spreading that and sharing it off. So
Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest. We're going to continue in just a minute. Let's go get it done. 5 seconds out. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the stuff. Let's get to it. Here we go. Okay, we got more coming up here. Harmony Tomaszewski is our guest. You can find her at Harmony, TOMASZEWSKI.com. I know it's hard, but you should be able to. I actually just spelled it phonetically on the Google and said Harmony Tomaszewski GVEA, and it sent me right to the website on Google, so you can figure it out. Next time, it's going to be harmony4gvea.com. That'll be easier. People trying to figure out how to spell your name, Harmony. Anyway.
You knew everything.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. All right, so we're coming back to it. And again, I just want to point out that there are problems with, everybody's pushing for safe, reliable, green, renewable. I mean, whatever the phraseology is. It's all around stuff that, great, it's good to have, but it cannot be the main source of distribution. I mean, it cannot be the main source of power because it's unreliable. Whether we're talking about, we're not in California, we're not in New Mexico, we can't get the sun, 12 hours every day directly overhead blaring down at you, right? You get some sun in the winter, but not much. In the summer, great, 24 hours of daylight, but in the winter, you're not getting much. The wind, same thing, unreliable. You cannot build it as a base, and so you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater and say we need all these things because they cannot produce enough reliable energy to basically fund the whole thing, to power the whole community.
Right. We were talking about that. We really need reliable base load there. We have a battery system here in Fairbanks, but it just doesn't have the capability that we really need. They're getting grants for a new battery system here, but even that will only last 12 hours. So that's awesome. We need a battery system that's going to help, and that'll help with transitions if renewables are working. if that's a good plan. But the battery lasts 12 hours. So what happens with your wind, with your solar, when you've got a day without wind or a storm, a day without sun? I mean, you have to have that base load. We can't, that 12 hours, it seems like a long time until you've had a really big storm, until
Right.
something's happened. And we need that reliability. We can't go without it. We have extreme weather up here, and we need to make sure we're safe and that we're able to use our energy. So, there's a lot of variables that go into it, and we have to have that reliable base load and make sure that we have the batteries, which we don't even have. We don't even have that 12 hours yet. So, with that strategic plan that they had made to shut things down, the timeline just wasn't working. It just didn't come together. And so, when the board is making these decisions, I know that they have a lot of input that they want to see those renewables right now. But we just need to make sure that the technology is there, that the other steps are in place first, and that we're not shutting down reliable energy, consistent energy, cheap energy.
Right, exactly. Well, and again, we keep going back to it, but it's the economics. The ratepayer has to be able to afford it until, because if not, you're driving ratepayers out and sharing the burden with a smaller and smaller pool each cycle, each time that happens. And then another group goes out, and then it goes up even more, and then another group goes out, and pretty soon the economy of scale is gone. And that's what this is all about. That's why it's a collective. That's why it's a co-op, because it's the economy of scale of thousands of ratepayers. But if you drive out the ones that can least afford it, they're shouldering a burden for everybody else, even though they're on the lower side of poor. They're still shouldering that burden. It has to be affordable and make economic sense for everyone. We cannot just throw out things that are working because we're looking for this ideal utopian concept of free until we hit 0 point energy. We're never going to do that, right? When we develop 0 point energy and you can have a little thing the size of your cell phone in your house powering your whole house, until that time comes, it's not, we've got to have the reliable, same old thing that we've been doing, whether that's coal. Now, have we talked about, I mean, has there been any discussion about micronuclear? Has there been discussions about more dams? Has there been discussions about, finding ways to keep the coal plants open? Because we've got 1,000 years worth of coal in this state to power the whole country, let alone Fairbanks, Alaska. What other discussions of other alternatives have there been?
Yeah, so we are actually getting a micronuclear plant, micronuclear device out of Eielson. They're gonna, but it's a study. Um,
Right. It's a
what they're
battery, right?
having, pardon me?
It's a battery. It's a nuclear battery. It's a
Right.
nickel nuclear
So,
battery, right?
but it won't even start till 2027. And what they're getting is they're doing studies for our climate, for our areas, how it's going to respond. And that's great. But the size of what they have, they would need 3 of those just to power Eielson. So this is a very micro nuclear battery. So that's great that we're moving forward and we're going to have information on it. Um, Bradley Lake, there is a Dixon divergent plan where you would diverge other glacial melt over to it, and that would increase the power. And that's a fabulous thing. I'd really love us to continue looking at that and see how we can make that happen. That would be beneficial to us. Um, the thing is that they have an idea of a purchase power agreement, a PPA, where they, with the wind, where they would purchase the power and they only have to purchase the power that's generated. And that is a good idea, that we would only be paying for the power that's made. The question I have, is there a penalty in there? If we don't get enough power, if we've moved over to that power, um, when that wind stops blowing or when we don't get enough power of what we hoped we had, where are we going to get that from? Is there some type of penalty? So now we can afford buying the power from Anchorage if Anchorage has power to give us. So there are ideas out there, but we just need to make sure in the contracts that we're covered as well.
Right.
So
Well, and the board has been hesitant. I know I've had conversations with Mike Kraft in his Delta Wind Farm several times over the last 15 years where he's produced it. He's built it. He's done it all. It's all there. And all he says is, let me tie in and I'll sell you some energy. And the board has been reticent because they wanted to build their own at another location. Or if you have options, why wouldn't you take them? Why? I mean, if they're there and your stated goal is to be renewable and green and everything else, why wouldn't you push for that? Why wouldn't you do that? Why the hesitancy in those negotiations?
That's a great question. And I've never really been able to get a clear answer on it. And so I think we'd love to know that if that's, but they're not talking about doing it themselves now at Shovel Creek. That is a separate group that would do it. Golden Valley does have Eva Creek that has not performed well, that has had issue after issue. The company went bankrupt. The parts are not available, very difficult to find. Technicians have not been available. So I don't think they're looking at doing that on their own again, but they are looking at the purchase power agreements. And Delta has a good record of having this completed, of being reliable. He knows what he's doing. He's invested. He's Alaskan. Um, if this purchase power agreement, why aren't we doing it with them? Seeing how that works.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you ostensibly want to do it, you think you would want to do it, not just do it your way. I mean, I think is kind of what I'm getting from it is, oh, we want to do it, but we want to do it on our terms, not on your terms, because he had the gall to build it himself and build it out of pocket and make it a private thing. And it's mind-boggling. Harmony, we're down to the last 2 minutes here or so on the program, so I want you to extol the virtues of why people should search that mess of mail on their counter for the ballot, why they should mark Harmony Tomaszewski. I mean, give us the final pitch here as we go through.
Yeah, we just have to do something different in order to get a change. We can't continue ignoring it. We need to get involved. We need a balance on that board. We need people who care about people, who are going to look at the numbers and who are advocating for you. And so we have to get involved. So I'm just asking you to find that ballot, vote for me, get it mailed in, and let's make a change. Let's have someone who's really caring about the rates and how it's going to affect you, and asking why, having them have an answer for their choices.
Because again, we want people to stay in Fairbanks. I mean, I'll be honest, one of the reasons
Me
why
too.
one of the reasons why I left Fairbanks was the cost of energy. I mean, when I moved down here to I've said it a million times, but I saved $5,000 in utilities in the first 8 months. I paid a fifth of what I was paying in Fairbanks for the same amount of energy. Now that's changed slightly now, but still, it's much less than what Fairbanks is paying. That's a big indicator. You don't want that to happen. Harmony Tomaszewski. You can find her on the web at harmonytomaszewski.com. You can Google it phonetically and find her. Just put GVEA in there. Thank you, Harmony, for coming on board.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
I hope good luck. Again, ballots have got to be in by June 4th. Out of time for today. Tomorrow, Mike Shower. We'll be back tomorrow. All right, Harmony, I wanted to give you one final bite at the apple here. We're off the radio, off the air, but people could still go back and watch this on Facebook, and you could point people to this. You could send people to the video on Facebook or YouTube and tell them to check you out an hour or two. So final thoughts for you as you wrap things up. You know, anything that you didn't get to say that you want to say, any other people you want to throw under the bus, now's the perfect time to do it. It's all good. So you get the last word here.
Thanks. Yeah, I want people to get involved. I want them to care about their community. I want them to care about their neighbors. And we have to take action. Every single one of us. Is just not enough. No one was running against the incumbent. No one else put their name in. And I just felt someone had to do something. Someone had to do something. And I would talk to different people and say, are you running? Are you interested? Someone has to do something. And finally said, I am someone. I understand some of these issues. I've been involved. I care. I understand the numbers. And so I put my name in. And it was hard. It's not an easy thing to put yourself out there and to do this. And this has been putting yourself out there is a huge step. And I
It's
just, I
uncomfortable.
want everybody to do it. It's
It's
uncomfortable. It's
uncomfortable
not fun.
because you have people walk up to you and say, if they're going to die, let them die and decrease the I mean, people actually say stuff like that. I mean, it is crazy to see that kind of ideology out there. But I mean, and your own ideas get challenged. You have to defend your own ideas, and so it does get uncomfortable when you're out there
It
doing
is.
that. I know.
And people say, do you just want a job? And I say, I have a pretty good business. I could make a lot more if I would just mind my own business and do my job. But I think every one of us needs to get involved, whatever committees or boards. I just think we need to get back with the community, paying attention and holding others accountable. And so I say that to everyone else. So here I am putting myself out there because I think Fairbanks is worth it. We need to work for it and we need to make it better.
Yeah. Well, again, if you live in District 4, which is a huge part of the interior, it's a huge part. I don't know how big the other districts are, but that's a big district. That district's probably as big as Rhode Island. I don't know. It's huge. But you could vote to Harmony Tomaszewski. Just go find that ballot. If they don't have the ballot anymore, can they go to the GVEA office and cast a ballot?
No, there's no in-person voting. There is e-voting, and they can call Golden Valley and get the helpline number and do an e-voting or get another ballot sent. But it has to be received by June 4th. So really, we can't be having it sit on the counter anymore. If they want to get involved, if they want to see a change on that board, if they want a balance, they've got to mail it in right away. And businesses can vote. Every membership, has a vote. So some people even have multiple votes because
Right.
it depends on how their membership is set up.
Right. Every account, essentially, every ratepayer, whether it's a business or a person, or you got a multiplex with 4 different. If you've got a duplex or a triplex with 3 or 4 different meters, and you're paying the bill for the renters, you get all those votes. That's kind of how it works. Each ratepayer gets a say. Well, Harmony, good luck to you. I hope you make a difference. I mean, again, I hope more people don't have to make the decision that I had to make, which was, how can I afford $450 a month every month for my electricity, plus my heating oil and everything else? It's a tough choice. It is really a tough choice. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on board, and we look forward to seeing you win and being on the board in June. Thank you so much for coming on board.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of the show for today. Again, tomorrow, Mike Shower, fingers crossed. I think everything's going well. That was the last word I had. I'll double check tonight. We'll know. Thursday, we're going to be doing some firearm stuff. We're hoping to bring Jacob Solomon, because, again, I will be off on Friday. Yes, a 4-day weekend. Oh, what more could a guy ask for? All right, my friends, we are done. We will see you tomorrow. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.
you.